Privilege to have with us this weekend Dr. Sean McDowell, and he and a group of others were here speaking at the Be Ready conference, and that was just a great conference, a great turnout, great sessions of equipping. And so Dr. Sean McDowell, he is a teacher at Capistrano Christian School in Southern California. He's also a professor at Biola University. He's a world-renowned speaker, an author, lover of Jesus, and loves equipping Christians and equipping Christians to be thoughtful about their faith, our faith. As well, he is married, has 3 children. And so would you just give me, I said this last night, would you do me a favor and give him a very, very warm Calgary Center Street Church welcome. There you are.
Thank you, Ken. I appreciate that. Well, good evening. It's a joy to be here with you in spring. Did I get that right? I'm a little confused. It's January. Okay, all right, I got it. We're actually from Southern California, and my 5-year-old son is here with me, and everyone's been apologizing for the weather. I'm like, are you kidding me? It doesn't snow where I'm at. This is great. My son's been loving it. Until he took a snowball to the face and got that rite of passage, right? It's kind of what happens. Well, as we start off this evening, I just want to ask you a question, and I think I know the answer to it. Question is, have you ever had a difficult conversation that you put off as long as possible? Of course you have. If you're human, this is the case. Well, for me, one of the hardest conversations I have that I put off was when I was going to tell my parents that I wasn't sure that I bought and still believed the faith that they raised me in. I was about 19 years old, and just kind of hit a period of doubt, started to question things I learned, read other perspectives, wonder if it was really true, and decided I had to tell my dad what I was really thinking. Now, to give you a little context, any kid telling his parents that raised him in faith, that's a difficult conversation. But in particular, for my father, you might recognize the name Joshua McDowell. He was here with me this weekend. He spent over 50-plus years speaking, debating, writing, proclaiming truth. In fact, he set out in his life when he was in his teenage years, actually in his early 20s, to disprove Christianity. Had a difficult background of abuse, alcoholic father. Some Christians challenged him, and out of spite, he went to disprove Christianity, was surprised by the truth, understood the love of God, led him to the Lord. He spent 5.5 decades proclaiming truth around the world. And I'm going to my father to say, yeah, not sure that I buy it. Well, to make a long story short, I have come full circle and obviously embraced Christianity, or probably wouldn't be preaching here this evening. But I want you to notice something in some ways, my father and my journeys could not have been more different. Him from pain, looking at Christianity from the outside, trying to disprove it. Me from the inside going, I don't know if I believe this. I need some good reason if I'm going to bet my life on it. But you know what we had in common? Is we began our spiritual quest with Christianity. I want to persuade you tonight that if you are on a thoughtful spiritual quest, you would begin with Christianity. Now let me frame why I'm going to approach it this way. I teach at Biola University, a graduate school in Southern California, and I also teach high school part-time. And a number of years ago, I had a chance to take a group of high school students to Berkeley, California. You might know it as Berkeley, California. And a friend of mine, Brett Kunkel, led us on this trip, and we had brought in some atheists, some agnostics to speak to these high school students. We sent students out to go talk with other students on campus, and I trained my students how to know what they believe and why, and engage people in conversations with different beliefs. And we had a chance to speak to this group called SANE. And SANE is an atheist agnostic group on the Berkeley campus. They now go by a different name. And it stands for, or it stood for, Students for a Non-Religious Ethos. In other words, they get together and plan events trying to get rid of the beliefs that basically you and I have. And we showed up and had a chance to give a message to them. Now, if you were going to speak to a group of atheists or agnostics, what would you say? What would you say if you had this opportunity? Would you try to convince them the Bible's true? Jesus is the Son of God? That there's evidence for intelligent design? How would you approach this? Well, I decided to take a little different approach. I said, I'm actually not going to try to convince you Christianity is true, although I believe that. Rather, I'm going to try to persuade you that if you're on a spiritual quest, the most reasonable place to begin with is Christianity. That's it. That a thoughtful person on a spiritual quest should begin with Christianity. I mean, I'd be thinking, well, of course you'd say this. After all, you're a Christian. But there's a fellow, you might recognize this name. Do you recognize the name Antony Flew? You see, for 5 decades at the end of the 20th century, he was the most widely read philosophical atheist in the world. He first delivered a paper he had written arguing that theology and the idea of God is meaningless before C.S. Lewis and the Socratic Club at Oxford in the 1950s. For 5 decades, read more widely than any philosophical atheist in the world. Well, he died in 2010. In 2007, he wrote a book. You know what the title was? There Is a God. Why the World's Most Notorious Atheist Changed His Mind. Now, as far as we know, he didn't become a Christian. But he wrote something at the end that's so interesting. He said this. He said, I think the Christian religion is the one religion that most clearly deserves to be honored and respected. There's nothing like the combination of a charismatic figure like Jesus and a first-class intellectual like St. Paul. If you're wanting omnipotence to set up a religion, this is the one to beat. Isn't that interesting? Now you might stop and think, okay, wait a minute, Sean, maybe you didn't get the memo. This is a church service. We all believe in Jesus here. We're not on a spiritual quest. If that's you, then the purpose of this is to give you some tools to be more equipped to have conversations with your non-Christian friends and family members and coworkers. I want to give you some tools to be able to more articulately share the uniqueness of the Christian faith. If you're not a Christian and you were dragged here by somebody to church, or you just came inside because it's so cold and this is the first place you could find, I hope you'll just listen with an open mind and ask, is there reason to believe this is true? What sets Christianity apart? That's it. So let's start. Let's take a look at 4 reasons why a spiritual quest would begin with Christianity. The first one is based on a movie that came out in the early 2000s by the name of The Body with Antonio Banderas. You're probably thinking, I haven't heard of this movie. And there's reason why. Because it's shown on airplanes and then instantly went to TNT at midnight. This show, The Body, although it was based on a really interesting premise. Antonio Banderas plays a former Green Beret who becomes a Catholic priest. And as soon as he becomes a Catholic priest, the whole Catholic Church goes into an uproar because there was a tomb that dated to the middle of the 1st century. They found a body that had been crucified. It was a rich man's tomb. There were nails with it. And they found a coin of Pontius Pilate that dated exactly to that time. So the church was in an uproar because they thought they found the body of... Okay, like 3 of you got it right. If you don't know the answer to a question in church, just say Jesus. You'll get it right half the time, right? My son who's with me, he's 5 3/4. He's in junior kindergarten. And the first day of class, this is where kids learn to not blurt out answers and to raise their hand, get called on by a teacher. So the teacher thought she'd start easy. She said, class, what's gray? Has a big bushy tail and climbs in trees. But no kid raised their hand. She said, class, raise your hand, I'll call on you. What's gray? Has a big bushy tail and climbs in trees. Nothing. She thought, this is bizarre. 5-year-olds know this. What's gray? Has a big bushy tail and climbs in trees. Finally, one of my son's classmates, little Johnny, sheepishly raised his hand in the back. She said, yes, Johnny. He said, I'll say Jesus, but it sure sounds like a squirrel to me. Now in this movie, all the signs were that they had found the body of Jesus. And the church goes into an uproar. Why? Because of something the Apostle Paul said in 1 Corinthians 15:14. He said, if Christ is not risen, our faith is worthless. Do you realize if this historical event didn't take place, if Jesus didn't die, he wasn't buried, didn't physically rise on the third day, Christianity is false. It's false. In fact, Paul says we are to be pitied because of this. You see, there's no other religion that stakes its entire true belief system to a single, testable, historical event. The first thing I told these students is the reason you should begin a quest with Christianity is because Christianity is testable. You can actually examine historical claims that the entire religion rests upon. Let me say it again to make sure it sinks in. There is no other religion that stakes its entire belief system to a single, testable, historical event. Jesus publicly walked on water. He healed the lepers. He raised the dead. And he pointed towards his own resurrection as being the ultimate sign of the truth of his message. Look what John writes in 20 verses 30 through 31. He says, "Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and by believing you may have life in his name." Christianity is testable. You can investigate it. Now compare this for claims that you might see in Islam, for instance. Now there are some later traditions that Muhammad did miracles, but these are much, much later. If you read the Quran, it doesn't talk about public miracles that are done that can be investigated to attest the claims. Rather, the test is, it will say multiple times, if you don't think this is divine, we challenge you to write a surah or a chapter as beautiful as this. In other words, the supposed beauty of the Quran is what makes it divine. Now that's very different than a publicly testable claim about its truth. That's very different. I also take my students. Every other year, we'll be going this next spring. These are my high school students, not my graduate students. And we go to Salt Lake City, spread out in pairs of twos, and go knock on doors and ask people if they want to talk about Jesus. Now, it's particularly fun there because there's many people of the Church of Latter-day Saints, many Mormons who are there, who have knocked on your door and knocked on my door and asked to talk about Jesus. Now, sadly, many tell me they have stories of evangelicals who slam the door or call them a cult, which just doesn't build bridges, doesn't tend to help. But we go to Salt Lake City, and we go and have conversations and listen to people, talk to people, learn from people, and ask questions. And one day, my son and I, this is my older son, we were walking around outside of BYU, Brigham Young University. We're kind of knocking in some of the dorms where students lived. We knocked on a door, a fellow opened who was just graduating that spring, heading to Washington, D.C. to kind of work in law and politics. I said, "Do you have any time to talk about Jesus?" He said, "I can't right now. Come back in an hour and we'll talk." So we walked around, came back in an hour. Came inside, we had a wonderful conversation. Thoughtful, challenging, encouraging, respectful. And I asked him, I said, "Can you tell me, how do you know that Mormonism is true? How do you know that it's true?" And he gave the response that good Mormons are trained to give. He cited Moroni 10:4, which says something to the effect of, if you read the Book of Mormon and you pray over it and have a contrite spirit, God will show you through a feeling that it's true. Later, that's described as a burning in the bosom. I said, so a feeling is the way you know your religious beliefs are true. I said, can I ask you a question? If you want to know something's true in science, you follow logic and evidence and reason. You do that with history, you do that with psychology, you do that with math. Why, when it turns to religion, the most important questions, would you shift from examining objective reality to trusting your inner feelings, especially when Jesus says it's out of the heart that comes wickedness and idolatry? Give you one last example and we'll move on. I said to the students, I said, take for example Buddhism, which is obviously very, very different. But in Buddhism, many times they'll talk about empty the mind. Don't try to use the mind to understand reality. Empty the mind. In fact, Buddha allegedly said, by this you shall know a man is not my disciple, that he tries to work a miracle. Yet Jesus performed miracles. He fulfilled prophecy. in a publicly testable way. I said to these students, I said, look, if you're on a spiritual quest, at least begin with a religion you can investigate and you can put to the test. I said, let me give you a second one. And I'll ask you guys, I'm curious what you would say. If you're going to buy a car, what criteria are very important in the car that you choose? Throw out there some important criteria. Safety, looks, economy, Jesus. There's always one, right? There's always one. Good answer, you were listening. Bumper stickers. That, my man likes bumper stickers, all right? Movable seats. Oh, heated seats. My bad. We don't know what those are in Southern California. What else? The technology that it has, okay? Price, yeah, that's kind of important, right? Speed, look, safety, bumper stickers. How about price? Look, if you did all this search for a car and you narrowed it down to 3 options, $20,000, $10,000, and one that was free, which one at least should you rule out first? The one that is free, right? If you can get a car for free, don't pay for it. That's kind of common sense, isn't it? You know what's interesting? Probably your parents have told you the same thing my parents at times told me. They'd say, son, nothing in life is free. You got to work for it. That's great advice, but ironically, if Christianity is true, the most important thing in all of life is free. I told these students, I said, not only can you test the claims of Christianity, but you should begin a thoughtful spiritual search with Christianity, because in Christianity alone, salvation is free. Friends, grace is unique to Christianity. Look what Paul writes in Ephesians 2:8-9. He says, for by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing, it is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. Grace is unique to Christianity, that salvation is a gift if we're humble enough to accept it. A few years ago, I took a group of high school students to downtown LA, and we had a chance to visit some mosques, go to some Islamic centers. And one day we went to a city near where I live called Garden Grove, because quite a few Muslims live there. And we just spread out in groups of 2 or 3 to look for Muslims just to have conversations with. And I noticed a market, a small market, like a little restaurant that had Arabic writing all over it. There were 3 men outside speaking in Arabic, kind of loud and having a good conversation. I thought, good chance these guys are Muslims. So my son was with me. We came walking up. I just introduced myself and said, hi, my name's Sean McDowell. I'm a teacher. I'm here with my son. And we're just wondering if you are or know someone who's a Muslim. We just love to have a spiritual conversation. The guy looks at me and goes, oh, don't talk to him. He's a bad Muslim. Talk to Ahmed. He's a good Muslim. I said, all right, I'll talk to Ahmed. So we sat down. We had a wonderful conversation. And by the way, I think most people, if you treat them respectfully, are willing to have faith conversations. But especially Muslims. I've had so many good conversations if you treat them simply the way you would want to be treated. So we sat down. I didn't jump into a debate. I just said, you're a Muslim. Would you be willing to tell me your story? How'd you become a Muslim? How do you practice your faith? What does your faith mean to you? What do you love most about your faith? What do you think are the most common misconceptions that people have about being a Muslim? Then I shifted. I said, what do you and I have in common as I'm a Christian? I said, what do you think there's some differences between how you practice and what you believe with my faith? And one thing that he pointed out, he said, in your faith, you talk about grace and salvation being free. He said, in my faith, we have the 5 pillars. And we are to work. He said, now, ultimately, salvation is a gift from God. But we are to do certain works, so our good works outweigh our bad works, like on a scale. We are to follow the pillars, the 5 pillars. This is why Surah 17:13, which is a passage in the Quran, says, for we have made every man's actions cling to his neck. and we will bring forth to him on the resurrection day a book which he will find wide open. I pointed out to these students, I said, it's within Christianity that salvation is free that makes Christianity unique, and I'll never forget. We're speaking, so this atheist group's in front, my students are in back, and this guy's sitting on my right. He was tall, he's maybe 6'3", 6'4", probably 6'8" with his hair going up, because he looked like he just got out of bed, even though it was probably 7 or 8 at night, which as a college student, he probably just did get out of bed. And he looks at me, and I remember exactly what he said. Here's what he said. He said, your arguments are so bad. If I didn't know any better, I would think you were stoned on crack. Now, how do you respond to this? You say, look who's talking, right? Is that helpful? And the Christian response? Probably not. Actually, let me change that. Certainly not. You know, the Bible says, a gentle word turns away wrath. A soft word breaks a bone. There's something about responding with grace, because you know what? If someone's going to speak that way to me or you, I guarantee other people have been speaking to him that way. Rick Warren said, hurt people hurt people. I think he's right. So I try to respond with grace. I fall short sometimes. I'm a work in progress. But in this time I turned to him and I said, you know what? If I'm wrong, please point out to me, and I'll change my views. Where are my arguments so bad that I'm missing the boat? He goes, look, I'm taking a class on Buddhism right now. And there's a kind of Buddhism called Amida Buddhism. And in Amida Buddhism, along your journey, there's certain pockets of grace where the gods give you a pass and do for you what you can't do for yourself. I looked right back at him. I said, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Within Amida Buddhism, because I was taking a doctoral seminar on Buddhism and actually had read about this. I said, you're right. For some Buddhists, on their journey, there's pockets of grace that the gods will give them. But here's the difference. There's a difference between a journey based on works, where you get a few acts of grace, and an entire system, which we see in Christianity, that is entirely a gift of grace. That's the difference with Christianity. We were in Salt Lake City again. This is on a different trip, and I was walking with my son, again, another student. And we had a chance we were knocking on doors, and we got to speak with a fellow who had been Mormon pretty much his whole life. Invited us into his house. We had a wonderful conversation. Tell me about your faith. Tell me about your family. What do you believe? How do you practice? Really listening to each other, asking questions. And we kind of said, what do we have in common and where do we differ again? And one thing he said to me, he said, in my faith, if you want the highest level of salvation, which is exaltation, there are certain temple works you have to do to acquire that salvation. I said, that's a little different than the historic Christian faith that says the highest level of salvation, although we understand it differently, is entirely a free gift. This is why 2 Nephi 25:23, a passage in the Book of Mormon, says specifically, it is by grace you have been saved after all that you can do. You see how different that is? In fact, I think I really began to understand grace. I was in graduate school studying theology, had one of those night classes that are 3 hours, studying biblical languages. And before the class started, there were maybe 15 or 20 of us in the class, and the professor would have a different student lead a devotional before each class started. One of my classmates was a filmmaker by the name of Johnny, and it was his turn. He pulls out his wallet, starts walking up and down the aisles, and puts $20 on each of our desks. Now that kind of got my attention, right? This wasn't 20 Canadian dollars. Okay, I'm sorry. I just giving you a hard time. I'm glad you laughed at that, right? You're like, yep, you're doing exactly what your president did. Here we go again. You Americans, we'll just leave it at that. Just having fun with you. Puts $20 on each one of our desks. And that did get my attention because I was a student at that time in particular. He walks to the front, and he kind of let this sit while he's doing it, and we're wondering what's going on. And he goes to the front and he goes, this $20 is totally for you. And then he paused. He said, before I tell you why, realize I did talk to my wife about this. If you spend money like this, talk to your spouse. I'm like, that's a really good word. If you're younger and you're not married, in fact, if you are married and you're about to spend $300 or $400, talk to your spouse. Amen? Yeah, that's good advice right there. And then he says, that aside, he goes, this is a free gift for each one of you. He goes, you didn't ask for it. You don't deserve it. You did nothing to earn it. You could do whatever you want with this money. You can leave it. You can take it. You can give it away. You can spend it. It's a free gift for you. But realize, this cost me something. It's a free gift. But it cost me something to give to you. He said, you know why I'm doing this? Because all of you are going to go out and be ministers of the gospel. And I found that there's so many people, even in ministry, who are trying to earn their favor before the Lord and other people by doing things and they don't understand God's grace. It's worth $400 to my wife and I to make sure that you understand that grace is a free gift. Go be agents of grace to people. And I sat there and I thought, I get it. That's like grace. You see, religion is about man trying to get to God. Christianity is about God coming to man. There it is. A friend of mine on his spiritual journey had a really interesting journey. He had a number of dreams before he became a Christian. And one time he had a dream. He fell out of a boat and was drowning. You ever have those dreams where you're drowning? They're kind of miserable. You just want to wake up. And he said, I remember looking to the shore and I saw kind of a statue of the Buddha waving to me, saying, come to me. And he's like, I'm drowning. I can't. And he kind of had that startling wake up. The next day, or shortly after that, falls out of a boat, drowning again. But this time, he can't save himself. He has an image of Jesus reaching down with his hand, saying, I will come to you. And he pulls him out of the water into the boat. Do you see how unique Christianity is? It says you can't earn salvation. You can't fix your own heart. You can't live a life for your good deeds to outweigh your bad deeds. Salvation is simply when we're humble enough to accept as a free gift what Jesus has done for us. I say to these students, I said, look, doesn't it make sense to begin your quest on a religion you can examine and test? Second, in which salvation is free. Don't pay for something if it's free. I said, but third, the third reason you should begin a quest with Christianity is because you can actually live like Christianity is true. Don't you want a belief system that you can actually live out? Now, I'm not saying that everyone who claims to be a Christian follows all the principles. Of course, that's not true. In fact, ironically, part of the Christian message is the heart is fallen and we will consistently fall short to follow what we say and believe is true. I'm actually making a different point. I'm saying that Christianity carves up the world at its joints, meaning that Christianity offers a belief system that matches the way the world really is, so we can live like it's true. Every other belief system at some point, people will bump up against the wall and have to suppress some truth we otherwise know is the case. So let me give you an example. Within Christianity, you are body and soul. Your body may change, but your soul, your immaterial self, remains the same over time. So your identity is rooted in your soul, which is embodied. Your soul stays the same, your body changes. Now in Buddhism, one of the truths you'll hear is that a human is an anatta, which is a no soul. What does that mean? That means the one thing you can trust is that you actually don't stay the same over time, and that there's constant change in everything over time, including human beings. So you're actually not the same person that woke up this morning, came into the service, and even the same person that I started this example and I started this message. Let me ask you a question. Which of these two more matches up with the way that we actually live? So I'll give you an example. Take our criminal justice system. You ever realize that the criminal justice system is based on the existence of the soul? For one, you can't have free will without the soul. So you can't condemn someone and say they should have acted differently if there's not a soul. Matter doesn't have free will. But second, and more germane to this example, is that, think about it. If you stand up before a jury and somebody is charging you with a crime, and they say, look, we have video, we have DNA, we got fingerprints, and we have 10 eyewitnesses. If you were an anatta, meaning a no soul, do you know what your defense could be? It wasn't me. I didn't do it. That was a different person. Identity has changed. You can't lock me up. That was somebody else. Now, nobody actually lives that way. We'll say your body changes, your beliefs change, but there is something identical with you and the person who committed the crime. You're guilty, we're going to lock you up. Let me give you another example. Darwin said something very interesting in his autobiography. He said, the horrid doubt always arises whether the conviction of man's mind, which is developed from the mind of the lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. Would anyone trust the conviction of a monkey's mind if there are any convictions in such a mind? Now, what was Darwin saying? Let me unpack this for a second. Darwin realized that his view of naturalistic evolution was a purposeless, unguided, blind process. So if you apply that to the brain, how did the human brain get here? It wasn't designed to understand truth. It wasn't built. The brain itself, on his own theory, is the result of a purposeless, material, unguided process. So in his autobiography, Darwin goes, okay, wait a minute. If the brain is unguided and it came about through this purposeless process, how can I trust anything my brain tells me is true? Do you see the problem? If your theory undermines any basis you have for concluding that your theory is true, you might want to try a different theory. Now, ironically, the Judeo-Christian tradition doesn't have this problem. Why? Because God is a rational mind. We are made in His image. The universe is orderly. And we've given the command to multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. This is why it's not a coincidence that the scientific revolution took place in a culture saturated and influenced by the Judeo-Christian worldview. Now, I was sharing this with the students, and a guy responded, and he said this. He said, scientific studies show that the brain is not reliable. Now, notice what he was doing. He was trying to use reason and science and evidence to actually make his point. Let me note something C.S. Lewis said. C.S. Lewis said, if the value of reasoning is in doubt, you cannot try to establish it by reasoning. Right? If this purposeless Darwinian worldview undermines our trustworthiness in human reason, then you can't use human reason without establishing it that it's a reliable tool first. So this fellow, I'll never forget, he was sitting this time on my left in kind of the skeptical group, and he later contacted us and actually said, I think I'm starting to believe there's a God. Isn't that interesting? Because I think we treated him respectfully, but also made him think. I'll never forget what he said. At this stage, he said, quote, scientific studies show the brain is not reliable. You see his point? I was saying, Darwin said you can't trust the brain. He said, actually, scientific studies show the brain is unreliable. I said, okay, let me think about this. If your argument is that science shows the brain is unreliable, doesn't science itself rely upon the brain being reliable to give us trustworthy results? So you're telling me that you're relying upon the brain to conclude that the brain is unreliable. Now look, I've had a lot of debates. Maybe some of you had a Thursday night when I had the conversation with Bart Campolo. It's typically more often than not that after conversation I'm like, shoot, should have said that. Do you have those moments? oh, should have said this, thought of this verse, could have this one-liner, but in that moment it came right to me and I said it to him and he goes, huh, good point. Friends, atheists can do science. They could do wonderful science. I mean, look at Stephen Hawking, who died just recently. A brilliant scientist, no question about it. Of course atheists can do science, but not because of their atheism, but in spite of their atheism. Because even atheist scientists are made in the image of the very God that they reject. I told these students, I said, look, if you're seriously on a thoughtful spiritual quest, consider the claims of Christianity. It's testable. Salvation is free, and you can actually live like it's true. You don't have to compartmentalize your mind. And then I said, I got one more reason for you. Here's the fourth reason why you should begin a quest with Christianity. Because Christianity has Jesus at its center. And the moment I said this, I could see the look in their faces like, oh, you set us up, preacher boy. Can't believe we fell for this. I said, let me just explain. I'm not making the point that maybe you think I'm making. I said, have you ever noticed that Jesus is the one religious figure that transcends the category of religious figures? I said, he's the only religious figure that every other, or almost every other religious system wants to claim for their own. Nobody outside of Islam claims Mohammed. Nobody outside of Hinduism claims Krishna. Nobody outside of Buddhism, except maybe New Age, which is basically Buddhism reincarnated, sorry, bad pun, made palatable for the Western mind. But everybody wants Jesus. Do you know, even in the Quran, Jesus is described as a sinless, miracle-working, virgin-born prophet. Even Buddhists, many will say Jesus is an enlightened one. Hindus will say Jesus is an avatar. Many New Agers will say Jesus is a divine guru. In fact, that's exactly what's taught in the largest church in America, the Church of Oprah. She teaches New Age, and you better believe she wants Jesus on her side. Even many Jews will say Jesus was a good moral teacher, but he just wasn't the Messiah and was wrong about claiming to be God. I said to these students, I said, look, Jesus transcends the category of religious figures. If you're on a spiritual quest, shouldn't you begin with the religious figure that's influenced more lives and everybody wants him for their own system? Does it make sense to consider that the claims? Now, what's amazing about this is that Jesus had essentially no money. He had no political power. He had no military position. He wrote no books, humanly speaking. Yes, he inspired all the rest of the scriptures, but humanly speaking, wrote no books. He was poor, traveled less than 200 miles from his home. His public ministry was somewhere between 2 and 3 years, lived only into his lower 30s, died with few possessions, and yet the stories he told, the miracles he performed, the ministry he led, the words he spoke, have turned the world upside down more than anyone who's ever lived. If you're on a spiritual quest, consider the claims of Jesus. Because you know what? There's power in the name of Jesus, isn't there? No one stubs their toe and goes, ah, Buddha. And it is somewhat of a cultural thing, I realize that. But there's something, people are okay talking about God in the abstract. When you bring it to Jesus, sometimes people get uncomfortable. Because Jesus actually believed some pretty radical things, didn't he? He believed some things that were definitely politically incorrect. But what's amazing is nobody walked away from Jesus the same. Do you realize that? Nobody just met Jesus and went on their way as if they met somebody else. Either they cursed him, called him a drunk, called him a false prophet, crucified him, or fell on their knees and worshiped him as Lord. There's no middle ground with this person of Jesus. And yet, according to Jesus, the most important question in all of life you can answer is, who do you say that I am? Who do you say that I am? That's the question I asked to these students. I said, who do you really think Jesus is? And don't accept the position that's comfortable. Don't accept the position you want to believe. Go back and read the Gospels yourself. If you're a skeptic and you're here for whatever reason, or you're not quite convinced, I think you need to read a book, and it's called The Gospel of John. Just take an hour and read that Gospel and ask yourself, who is this person, Jesus? What did he teach? Why has his character drawn so many people in? And if you have an open heart and an open mind, the teachings of Jesus can change your life, because it's changed more lives than anyone who's ever lived. And I let it sit with those students. Friends, if you're like those students, like, yeah, I'm on a spiritual quest, I'm open-minded, read the Gospel of John. You got nothing to lose, but you have everything to gain. You say, but you know what, I'm not convinced. How do I know the Bible's true? How do I know Jesus existed? How do I know that he's God? When my father was a critic, he set out to disprove Christianity. Ended up being surprised by the evidence, drawn by the love of God, wrote a book called Evidence That Demands a Verdict in like 1972. Sold 4 million copies. Just this year, we updated it with 36 grad students and with 12 of the leading scholars in the world. How we know the Bible's true? Jesus claimed to be God. The Old Testament events happened. If you're a skeptic, consider getting a copy and reading it. You owe it to yourself. If you're not a believer, I told these students, I said, if you end up rejecting Christ, at least make sure you understand what Jesus taught and the reasons we have to believe it's true, so you don't reject a straw man. If you're a Christian today, friends, we owe it to our kids and our grandkids to know what we believe and why we believe it, so we can speak this truth with boldness. Amen? I've been here since Thursday with my son, who's sitting up there, so great, just drawing, and if you ask him, he'll say he's 5 3/4. I've been hanging out, but we have an early flight tomorrow. I hate to do this, but I'm going to sneak out tonight just to get him to bed. Usually I love to stay after and answer questions as long as I can, but if he comes back sick, his mom will never let him go on another trip with Dad. So I'm going to sneak out with him, but I want to thank you for being just such generous hosts of our time here in Calgary. God bless. Thanks,
Thanks so much, Sean. And, like Sean said, if you are here and you don't know what you believe about Jesus Christ, my encouragement to you is don't leave here without having a conversation with someone. We have our prayer partners that will be up here. We'd love to talk with you about Jesus. If you don't have the Gospel of John, I will get you one tonight, and you can take it home with you and start reading that. If you are here, many of you do believe that Jesus Christ is God's Son, that he's changed your life. My challenge to all of us is let's live like we believe it. Live tonight with your family, with your friends, like you believe it. Live tomorrow like you believe that Jesus Christ is who he says he is, and the change that he's made in your life. Let's live like we believe it. And now let me pray for you as you go. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May his face shine upon you. May he be gracious to you. Lift up his countenance upon you. May he give you boldness to live out your faith this week. May he give you hope that you will spend eternity with him forever. May he give you peace. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Have a great week, church.